The cEDH format has been under a lot of fire recently. Cheaters winning top prizes, 11-hour games, and the general sentiment around EDH as a format just leads to a lot of bad press for the sub-format of cEDH. A lot of these issues that content creators such as myself have clickbaited you into watching aren't really format-wide problems, it's just small administration issues that the community can come together on and stop. But that's kind of what I want to explore in this video, if cEDH is actually a really good format, and why it might actually be the best thing to happen to Commander in recent times. I want to start by framing this discussion from this post, and I want to use an analogy as well. So let's read this first bit here. You probably weren't pub stomped by a cEDH deck. Listening to players talk about their experiences getting pub stomped has led me to a major conclusion. The average EDH player has absolutely no idea what a cEDH deck actually looks like. And by extension, many of these players also don't have a good grasp on what the difference between cEDH and EDH is, and how cEDH actually is a subgenre of EDH as a format and not something separate. It is bracket 5, and that's one of the more positive things that have come out of the bracket system, that recognition. But it also doesn't clearly blur the line between bracket 4 and bracket 5, and a lot of the disingenuous conversations around my cEDH deck is actually technically bracket 4, and that's not really what it's about. It's about intent. And the analogy I want to bring to here is, let's say, for example, you, from your current abode, your residence currently, you go to a local convenience store to buy some candy every day, right? You take your change, you take your chump change, go buy yourself some chocolate, and there's only two ways you can get there. You can take a scooter, or you can take a bicycle. And both of those things you are equally capable of doing, and somehow it's both equally you're able to get there at the same time. What I found is the play patterns of EDH players, generally speaking, are actually just cEDH play patterns. And a lot of people don't actually know the difference and have their own personal biases affecting them for exploring different things. You may prefer the bike because that's what you're more used to. You may not have ever had a scooter. Heck, you may not actually feel safe on a bike because maybe you had a friend of yours recently fall off a bike, so you prefer the scooter. But because your friend fell off the bike doesn't mean that the bike for you is any worse necessarily. That's a whole different bike in a different situation. Really, where I'm trying to go with this analogy is the vehicle is similar. It's not exactly one for one, but it gets you to the end goal, which is having a fun experience, having the gathering, winning a game, whatever it is, experiencing a game of Commander. Because regular bracket 3 EDH, bracket 4 EDH, and bracket 5 cEDH is largely the same thing, just with different intent. The goal is ending up being the same thing, but the conversation and the rule zero discussion is different. And what I want to highlight in this video is not only are you as a cEDH player holding yourself back by not experiencing cEDH, but go over some reasons as to why cEDH is actually probably net better than your average EDH experience. I want to talk positively about the cEDH format. They typically walk away, talk about these large flashy plays that come out of nowhere super early that the cEDH players can pull out. And then they play 3 Eldrazi Titans in one turn. They had 12 lands played on turn 4. They hit me with 10,000 damage with Scoot Swim. These aren't real things, by the way. Like, some of them technically are. There might be commanders that can poop them all out. There might be, yes, you could play 3 Eldrazi Titans. I don't know why you would. There's just simpler ways to win. The whole thing that this highlights is that a lot of people have this perception that cEDH wins can be convoluted or are really complicated. And yes, there are decks that actually do have complicated lines. We're gonna go over that in a second. But there are decks that are really simple. They operate on hyper efficiency, good mana bases that are clean, none of your jank one of land card that you opened way back 20 years ago and you need to include in every one of your EDH decks. None of that stuff. It's always built around a metagame and built to be the best win conditions and the most efficient win conditions. The issue is, one of the biggest differences between casual decks and cEDH decks is that cEDH decks are extremely aware of minimum requirements to win a game of EDH, and they're completely disinterested in taking extra steps to get there. So for example, playing that pillow fort type of game, that engine building, they're not necessarily interested in that on average based on your commander. A lot of times you play these partner commanders in ways where you can gain access to different colors that A, give you different win conditions, but also B, give you more variety of protection, whether it be against what your opponent's doing or to protect your own win. They're not going to be building around a board of creatures, unless their name is Winota or Jetmir. They're not going to be making big flashy plays. They're putting out Thassa's Oracle lines and an Underworld Breach line, or playing an A+B combo with their commander 99% of the time. And whether it's with their commander or not, they're tutoring up or they're looking for a specific key set of win conditions, or maybe their commander is largely set around winning with one combination of cards. Even the hard stacks decks that people complain about are fundamentally still casual decks. Armageddon just isn't good enough when the entire table is on a full suite of fast mana, and you're not going to be built to take much advantage of the rest of the table when everyone's playing to compact wins with free spells. A 4-mana sorcery that doesn't win you the game isn't going to cut it when you're going to be casting Intuition or Ad Nauseam and actually winning the game. Another big thing to look at is the psychology of a pub stomper. They don't want to power out a win super fast, a clean turn to win. They want the rest of the table to watch their deck jerk itself off, while the rest of the table has to wonder whether to be impolite or to concede because they're too new to know what's going on and crying all over it. A fast, clean win isn't going to satisfy that kind of player. They want to have their time to properly terrorize the table. And in some ways, that's true. cEDH players do have sometimes a pub stomping mentality. Some of them just want to be the best and play the best, and that comes with all competitive players. When you come to a table to play competitively, that's just going to naturally happen. On average, at the highest tables, people want you to play to a certain speed. They want you to play well. But in my experience, the vast majority of cEDH players just want to play the game. They are really interested in you exploring the game. They want to, maybe proxy up some decks with you, let you borrow some decks. And again, as I just mentioned, this community is largely proxy friendly. Because yes, there are cEDH tournaments out there that don't allow any proxies or a limited amount of proxies, but a lot of them are full proxy. A lot of them are just a bunch of high skill players just looking to play the game and win their prize at the end, because it's not really about the cards that you own, it's about how you play them. Right? It has elements of EDH where you can still table politic, you can still have these conversations, but you're not going to do things like, how about you let me live for this turn and you do that? They're not going to do any of that. You're losing this game. But the type of conversations that you have are instead more in depth. That player has 4 cards in hand. They haven't moved any cards from here at this point. They've only played 1 card a turn. I'm thinking that they have some type of counterspell to stop you from winning. Maybe you should instead make this play to play around that. And what that does is it focuses someone's attention on that player, allowing them to take a look away from your hand and maybe your board, and then focus their win condition around playing around something that you've subverted. And so these are the type of conversations that you have. So you still have those discussions, those politicking. The framework of it is different. And so again, a lot of this can happen at a bracket 4 type of table. Wins at bracket 4 can be very similar. You're just not playing the random jank of engine building. You're playing the fast mana. Just like they said here, land destruction is largely useless in a world where some decks are just playing out a large amount of fast mana and or artifact mana. And so if you're not dealing with all of that, there's almost no point to kind of playing anything like an Armageddon. So with all that in mind, what I want to highlight is 3 reasons why I think cEDH is an amazing format. Why, yes, there have been recent controversies around cEDH, but also it's worth exploring for you as an average player. Again, firstly, I've already listed some reasons that I'm not going to go into. They don't count as a 3, but largely speaking, in my experience, the cEDH community is largely welcoming, and they are very proxy friendly. If you're worried about buying new cards, head to your local print shop and print out a bunch of proxies, put them over some basic lands and get going in some combos, because a lot of them care more about, playing the game and getting more experience and practice than they do about how expensive your cards are. Number 2, a lot of these games actually go about really short. A lot of people complain about like long commander games and long nights, but within an hour, instead of getting like 0.5 or 0.75 of one EDH game in, you could get in reasonably 2, sometimes even 3 to 4 games of cEDH, back and forth, people interacting, and really interesting gameplay that's not actually that complicated. Because games are condensed to a couple of games, you actually end up not coming across too many cards. And because things are built around a meta game, which I'm going to explore in a second, you don't really see too much of a variety of cards. So you don't have to worry about too much of the whole universe beyond side of things. So let's hop into the first bit of it. The wide diversity of meta of cEDH. Now, this is a thumbnail taken from the comedian. We're actually going to go over them in a second here, but really just going over the fact that EDH Top 16 is a great website for this, but cEDH has a concerted meta where there are a bunch of top decks in the format by popularity, by conversion rate, and there's a great amount of data around them. There's a lot of resources around them. So because there is a top meta, because there are like the best cards out there, for those of you that are worried about quote unquote universes beyond, if those universes beyond cards aren't necessarily like the best cards out there, the next best counter spell or something like that, you don't necessarily come across them here. So in many ways, yes, you are going to see them, but you aren't as well when it comes to cEDH. So in many ways, it's a quote unquote safe haven, unlike EDH. And in many ways, because things are a metagame, a concerted metagame, you don't have that problem of coming into an average game of EDH and coming across cards that you've never seen. You just get this like fatigue. You played your third game at the LGS at this point, and after this, you're going to leave. And at this point, you just look at your opponents and just tell them like, hey, just let me know when that card's relevant. I don't know what it does, but this is like the randomest commander I've ever seen. You're excited about it. I've never seen it. I don't know what's going on, but just let me know if it stops what I'm doing. Like, how many times have you had a variation of that conversation? In cEDH, you largely don't, because the more you play it, the more familiar you get with top commanders and the ways that people win, the cards that people use to get those wins on the stack. For example, if someone casts odd ad nauseum with 2 cards left in hand versus, 7 cards left in hand, or 5 cards left in hand versus 1, right? If they have 1 card left in hand, that probably means, okay, that's not force of will pitch something. That's not force of negation pitch something, right? And force of negation specifically here, if they add Nas that instant speed on your turn or whatever. But it kind of lets you think about like what certain cards they might have based on the mana that they have open and how the rest of the table is reacting. So many things are set in stone in cEDH. So there's not that much to think about, and there's a lot of depth in terms of what you can explore, whereas EDH can sometimes feel like a large game of solitaire. Like, I build my engine, oh, you have something to stop my engine, I'm going to try and politic in a way to remove that or remove that myself, and then still go back to building my engine. It's not ignoring the rest of the table. You do have to be hyper aware of what the rest of the table is doing based on the interaction that they have, how they can stop you, how you can stop them, and how they can stop you from stopping them, and all that stuff. There's the back and forth that's condensed into a couple turns and allows you to focus on the important things in the game of winning when it comes to cEDH. Next up, there's a lot of depth when it comes to cEDH decks. There's a lot of depth in exploration of key cards. So whether or not it's exchanging a win condition or two to quote unquote adapt to the meta, maybe a new commander that's coming out that a lot of people are excited about to cEDH, or whether it be exploring different ranges of converted mana costs in a hyper efficient deck. So for example, maybe you're a deck that tutors out a bunch of artifacts, exploring different dwarves in a Magda deck or something like that. As they come along, different shapeshifters and stuff, how do they ebb and flow in terms of your combo? Are they an artifact? Are they not? Like, these are the different conversations that you have specifically when it comes to a Magda deck, which we're going to talk about. But these minutia are actually really fluid in many ways. And yes, it does respond to a meta, but you can play some of your own options. There is flex in cEDH, but ultimately there is depth in the core that you're going to build. And I want to highlight this specifically with Magda. Magda is the cEDH deck that I personally have proxied up, and it's the one that I'm learning how to play and explore. And it's a really cool like creature toolbox deck that can actually win around a lot of stacks hate in the format. So specifically, Magda says whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, whether that be through a crew ability or attacking or just tapping through another ability, think of like Springleaf Drum. That's tapping a creature to create a mana source. That's tapping a dwarf, you're creating a treasure token. Sacrifice 5 treasures, search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So this way, the ultimate goal is in some way create an infinite amount of treasure tokens and then sacrifice all of those treasures to find dragons, shapeshifters, or artifacts to win the game ultimately. And this deck is so like complicated and actually really in-depth to learn that you have a whole cEDH primer called the Magdanomicon, and this is the primer section of it. Multiple chapters, pros, cons, how to win, winning through hate, combo enders, all this stuff. This is a fantastic article that I'm going to link down below. And it's not that every cEDH deck has this. What I'm highlighting is that it has the depth. It's not just about Thassa's Oracle win conditions. Sometimes it is, but it actually can allow for really in-depth looks at different strategies, different commanders, and how you can work around them. There's no other commander like Magda, because Magda specifically is going to work around one card. So if I went to kind of basic ways of generating infinite, the combo that you're looking for is Clock of Omens. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, you untap an artifact. So ideally what you can do is, let's say you have a shape-shifting artifact. right? Maybe you have something like Magda Clock of Omens out. If you have Adaptive Automaton that enters, choose a creature type, this becomes a dwarf as well. You could tap Magda and then Adaptive Automaton to untap an artifact, and then that artifact can be the Adaptive Automaton, and then when you tap both of these dwarves, you create a treasure token. So then you tap the treasure token and the Adaptive Automaton to untap the Adaptive Automaton. And then you just keep going and going and going, because every time that you tap the Adaptive Automaton, you make a treasure token, but then you activate the Clock of Omens ability to untap this. So you go infinite on treasures. That is the basic combo in this deck. And with that, you have different lines. You have different ways to beat different hate pieces. Maybe you can't activate abilities on creatures. And so you have different cards that can deal with that. You can't cast certain spells. And so you have channel abilities that can get around casting. You have different cards in this deck that can beat different combo hate and have different cards that can beat different parts of the top of the meta. There's so much depth to explore. You can have that level 1 experience, but if you're going to a tournament, you can have that level 2. You can practice, you can get around different combos, have experience with different decks that play different hate pieces against Magda. And you can adapt your own play style, play your own kind of niche card here and there that allows you to play better based on maybe your own local cEDH meta or your own local cEDH tournament circuit, and kind of be more successful in that aspect. So again, what we've gone over is the fact that cEDH actually is a lot more accessible, being more proxy friendly. On average, from what the community has told me in my experience, cEDH players are more welcoming to the environment. There are a lot of resources in terms of a set meta, so you can find different decks that are at the top, proxy them, and learn them really well. And if you wanted to really go in depth with the deck, it's not just Goblin Guide, go Burr, cast Lightning Bolt, win the game like in Modern Burn. Yes, there's depth to Modern Burn, but you can have in-depth primers like this that are multiple chapters and pages that take you a while to read and master, such as the Magdanomicon in Magda. The last thing that I want to go over is the content. Now, a lot of people have their problems with the kind of game nightsification of TCG content, and game nights has a lot of positives to it. A lot of people have their personal concerns with this in terms of like the editing and how they curate certain decks and how they, get people to mulligan, and the true CDH or the true EDH experience, whether it be Jimmy's tweets or underpaying editors or something like that. There's always some type of controversy around them. But ultimately, that's just what's come out in the public sphere. I would love to be on an episode of Game Nights one day, if possible. It's always been one of my magic dreams. But that doesn't mean they are the quintessential kind of experience when it comes to cEDH. There's a lot of great cEDH content out there, a lot of positive forces in the community that aren't just me clickbaiting you to watch different videos. You can look at maybe someone like The Comedian, and I want to specifically point to this video where The Comedian had a great positive role and angle to the whole controversy around the cheaters and the 11-hour game and everything. So I'd point you to this. Are they being a little too positive and maybe not as critical as they could be? Sure, but I think they understand that like there is a lot of criticism already, and they're trying to see how them as a person who's a icon or a beacon of positivity in the cEDH community can maybe shift people's focus and how we can move forward through discussions with TOs and everything. I highly recommend you watch this video. I'm going to link it down below. But The Comedian in general, a great content creator, a great positive force in the cEDH community. The next one is going to be Playing with Power. Obviously, many of you that are in the cEDH community are probably already watching Playing with Power. They recently hit 100K subscribers, which is really exciting for them. And they've been making really accessible, cut down, edited versions of cEDH for a while now. You can see some of their video lengths, 17 minutes, 14 minutes. And yeah, some of the things are cut down in terms of like how they're thinking and all that stuff. But if you just add like 10 more minutes of conversation and maybe just some thinking, that's generally the length of these cEDH games, right? Like 15-minute games. They get in multiple games sometimes. And yeah, they don't have to be that short. They can be longer, but it really just goes to show you once you watch some of these videos, how quick certain games can be and how quote unquote simple and complex decision-making can be in cEDH, holding up your mana, keeping certain hands, demonic tutoring for a land, which is like a legitimate thing to do just to be able to advance your port state. If you haven't tutored directly for a land, I don't think you've lived yet. And it's one of those cEDH experiences that actually happens more often than you think. The last content creators I want to mention is the Spike Feeders. They do have a lot of kind of off meta content as well, and some general cEDH as well, some pre-con gameplay, but they're ones that I actually started watching more recently, so I don't have the ability to speak on their content overall. I've seen other people talk on their EDH content. They have a lot of folks in the community on their videos, but again, I've started watching them more recently, and especially I believe they were the ones to introduce me to the whole, or maybe that was Commander mechanic. I don't want to quote things wrong, but it was like this competitive Wise Mothman video and everything. But regardless, and it might actually be, yeah, maybe it was the favorite precons talking about how they extrapolated it. But regardless, these are 3 content creators that are in the cEDH space that I'm aware of, that I watch. There are likely more that are fantastic as well. So I'm speaking on them. And with my experience, you can see that there are still going to be a large breadth of other cEDH content creators that may not have this high production quality, but are still posting games, still posting thoughts, and adding to the great lexicon that is the breadth of knowledge of cEDH. And that's what I wanted to highlight in this video. I hope I've done so. I hope I've shown you that there are accessible ways to play a more competitive aspect of Commander. You shouldn't hold yourself back. There's so many avenues to explore Commander, and yes, your Commander specifically might not be top meta cEDH viable, but there is a way to build it in cEDH, and that's not what this video is about. It's kind of opening the floodgates, showing you that cEDH isn't the big bad boogeyman that you think it is. It's not the, this is an EDH and this is a bad name for Commander. You know, a lot of people have a negative connotation towards Commander in general, and by proxy, they have a negative connotation of the competitive aspect of Commander. A lot of people think it's silly that we're separating cEDH, tournament EDH, from the rest of EDH, that there can be tournaments for EDH, which is a whole other problem that I think generally there should not be tournaments for off meta or like just non-cEDH. There should not be tournaments for that. That is ridiculous. But for cEDH, in a concerted meta where people are playing the best decks, there is a way for you to explore a new avenue of playing the game. It doesn't have to be around your favorite commander, but it could be around similar play patterns that you have in your commander. Your commander, your favorite commander, the one that you've had for years, or the one that you really like that you've discovered recently, has play patterns and has lines and has elements of it that other cEDH decks have. And they can only, by playing them, serve to improve you as a player, exploring different combos, finding different ways to win, finding different interaction points, realizing that you can actually interact at certain points on the stack and respond to certain spells or do things in certain ways, and find tricky ways to answer the things that your opponents are doing in their regular games of Commander. More games of Magic, generally speaking, should just improve you as a player. So what's the downside there? Try some cEDH. If you like it, you don't, you like it. If you don't, you don't. You just improved as a player by gaining more experience in an avenue that maybe you had a bad experience with or just a bad connotation with. And that's just broadening your perspective and adding more knowledge to your knowledge pool, adding more numbers to your pool of statistics can only help you be more informed as a player, more knowledgeable as a playmaker, and just a better planeswalker in general.